G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here on April Fool's Day.
Stepping into a crucial role to stop the spread, with the riot squad targeting Sydney-siders who are ignoring warnings. But there's a sign of hope.
Where we stand here, this is our country's infection curve. 19 Australians have now died, 5 have recovered. If we look at cases in New South Wales, they've now surged past 2,000, standing at 2,032. Victoria is next on 917 people there diagnosed with COVID-19, including 3 babies. Now, Queensland is interesting. It's at 743. It's now seeing the slowest increase in new cases on the mainland. As for the rest of the country, South Australia has 337. WA is now at 364. The Northern Territory 19. And the ACT and Tasmania, they've both recorded their first deaths. They stand at 80 and 69.
Okay, so in Australia, 4,561 cases diagnosed today. 355 people have recovered, 20 people are dead. So let's go back 3 weeks. The good news in Australia is that at the moment we've got a doubling every 7 days. So 1 week ago that'd be 2,200, but before that it was doubling every 3 days. So a week before, i.e. 2 weeks ago, we're talking about 500 cases perhaps, and a week before that 150, 180. Now on the 17th there were 134 cases in New South Wales. Go back a week and yeah, probably only looking at 250 cases in the whole country, and it takes about 3 weeks to kill someone. So the actual functional death rate can be obtained by taking your 20 dead as at today, dividing those into the, say, 250 cases 3 weeks ago. 20 divided by 250, and you got an 8% death rate, functionally speaking, on the cases that are diagnosed.
Eastern suburbs, beaches and parks, we saw heavily armed police under lights and sirens moving people on from park benches. Some were sunbaking, others picnicking, joining friends in the park. Authorities are taking no chances. They are desperately keen to ensure coronavirus does not spread further into our community. And we, of course, are being reminded that there are hefty penalties if you're found doing the wrong thing. $11,000 fines and 6 months in jail. But take a look at those images of police moving people on from some of the most picturesque places in our community. It really is quite eerie. We are being reminded, of course, also that the only reasons you really should be out and about are to get some exercise, to pick up food, medical supplies, and to see a doctor. And of course, if you're doing one of those very important essential services jobs in our community. Today, we're going to see another coronavirus station opened up here in Bondi for people wanting to get checked. Certainly a very different scene to what we're typically used to seeing here at Bondi in these beautiful autumn months. Carl?
Yeah, still plenty of people about. Yeah, thank you.
So Australia is shutting itself down, and the police are getting a little bit authoritarian, driving their cars across the grass in the public parks to chase young couples with prams back into their houses. You don't get much of a view looking to the northwest. So in view of the situation, I think I might just have to put on my apocalypse suit and we'll go for a walk in the opposite direction. And we shall see what there is to see. foot. Macro means big, pod means foot. Macro pod, big foot. There it is. The boundary of the sanctuary. Now, we must leave the safety of the forest and enter the farmer lands through the gate in the fence, constructed by a famous pommy floaty who came here he'd always wanted to be, an Australian pastoralist. So he got himself a tractor and he got himself a fence post driver, and he doubled the height of his rack and his slide, and he put a bigger weight on it, and his specialty was driving posts into ground, even stony ground. And to maximise the number of posts he could drive, he invented this: the strainer post for idiots who do not underconstumble triangles. Any rational fencing contractor would have put in a triangulated stay going down to a rock anchor plate, and that would have braced the fence post against the tension of the wires in the fence, all of which are strained up just short of breaking point. But no, Turkey Neck, as he was famously known before he pissed off, because he was in fact a floaty and not a new settler after all, yeah, he somehow thought that this extra long stay was going to do something useful, and what's actually happening is that the wire is in tension, using an enormous lot of wire too, and the wooden stay can rot and fall to pieces. But the cunning pommy bastard got paid to ram 4 strainer posts into everywhere where a normal fencing contractor would have got paid to put in 2. Here endeth the story about the man who did not underconstumble triangulations and what they are good for. And even the people in the woodwork shop who built the gate understood triangles better than Turkey Neck ever did. But anyway, after that little break, off we go, onwards and upwards in our quest to determine how well shut down New South Wales really is, by means of direct observation. The purpose of this incursion into the land of the harvest everythingists will be to observe a kilometre of the New England Highway, 10 kilometres north of town, in the knowledge that it's normal to encounter about 50 vehicles in the 10 kilometres between Yarraford Road and Glen Innes. 50 northbound vehicles in 10 kilometres while I'm travelling southbound. Last week, I was only encountering 20 to 25 between Yarraford Road and the 60k signs. So on every kilometre there would be 2.5 vehicles rather than 5. So we'll see what we find today. Now that it's illegal for more than 2 people to meet out of doors, unless it's a family. A parent and children, 2 parents and children, that's allowed. But the people who live in town are apparently expected to stay completely locked down inside wherever they live. Well, they're getting there. Regardez, Observatory Hill, the highest clearing on the bit for which I paid to be made responsible at law for everything alive on 40 hectares, 100 acres. Oh, look at it. Another bloody turkey gobbler fence post. But anyway, I do have a fence running off in that direction, but this stuff out over here, well, you see, all the way up to this big old tree, with the overgrown bark scar of a shield carved into it. This is my southernmost boundary marking peg. See this flat squared sawn edges with the paint marked onto it, and the little rocky cairn that it came out of. Yes, believe it or not, my boundary goes down there. Ain't that a funny story? So now, according to the rules of engagement back when I was a snotty-nosed teenager at boarding school, anytime we were beyond the boundaries of where we were supposed to be, hitchhiking into town for example, that was a pastime we used to call combating. Because all the vehicles belonging to the boarding school had matching number plates. Charlie Hotel Victor, CHV, indicating Chevalier. So we used to have to learn how to read number plates 100 metres out, ideally 150 metres out, so we could jump off the road, off the footpath, into a gutter behind a tree in order not to be spotted, observed, apprehended, interviewed, have our names taken, and earn for ourselves demerits, possibly even suspensions, hence combating. As soon as you see the enemy, the priests, the brothers, anybody who works for the school, hide. And this little hillbilly doesn't want to talk to any policeman driving across country to apprehend me for being outside of my little tiny hut. Therefore, the apocalypse suit. for a Corona highway reconnaissance to see what we can see. From the top of the northwest ridge of Hinkler Hill, we're in at a pond. I am pirouetting for your edification and amusement. The actual top of Hinkler Hill is that away. Through the gate and follow the ancient wheel tracks. About another 400 or 500 metres. But that's not where we're going. Oh, no. We're going to go over here. We're going to come down to what they call, quaintly, the military crest of the hill, where you can see for a long way, but you blend in pretty good still. Here we go. The perfect spot. We'll get the instrument set up. And we get it set up. And we find we can observe the highway for pretty much an entire kilometre. There we go, traffic. All the way down there to about the other side of my neighbour's place. And if we continue on to there, we can actually see Yarraford Road. As it goes towards the highway. And pretty sure that's the honey factory. That's a neighbour's mother's house. I live on opposite sides of the hill, kind of thing. And that's my actual neighbour, whose land I am technically kind of unofficially trespassing on, or maybe it's officially trespassing on. So, there's a kilometre. And there is a car, a ute. 4-door ute. By the look of the roll cage on the back, it might be a Colorado. So that's 2 northbound, 1 southbound. It is very quiet, isn't it? And we're talking 11:15. This is sort of the main inland route from Sydney to Brisbane, going along the top of the tablelands. It was bitumen during the Second World War, so that there could be a strategic transport route from north to south by road which could not be shelled by enemy naval activity. They reckon that in the cities, everybody's got modern new mobile phones with GPS facilities. So they've conducted tracking activities to see how many people are moving and how far they're moving in the cities based on their mobile phone activity. And it's, as of 2 days ago, it was only running at 18% of normal, and the powers that be have decided that that's not shut down enough. So we now have this current situation, which the New South Wales Police Commissioner is not hesitating to describe as a lockdown. There's an awful lot of emptiness on that road. Oh, here's a customer. Got him. That ring and bead graticule sight is bloody brilliant with this thing. So I think that's 3 north and 1 south. And here we have a truck. Now they're supposed to be going up and down the road. A couple of weeks ago, my son said to me in conversation, well, the worry is, Dad, everything on every shelf in every shop in town got there in a truck that burns diesel. He's 30 years old. I think he might have been 3 or 4 years old the first time he heard the old man say that. And it now comes tripping off his tongue as if it's something that he thought up himself, that he has to tell me about. I think it's great. Not that the town of Glen Innes is so terribly vulnerable. The whole of Australia's in the same boat. Oh, look at this. 1, 2 cars and a truck. Not seeing a whole lot of Winnebagos. There's a bit of a panic on Winnebagos. They're regarded as the cruise ship petri dishes of the highway. But now here's the thing. It's not only everything in the shops that gets there in a truck that burns diesel. All the coal trains run on diesel as well. We don't have coal-fired steam engines dragging the coal from the coal mine to the coal-fired power station. And we don't have blokes with shovels shoveling the coal off the train that doesn't get there because there's no diesel either. No, 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 no. What we have is bulldozers. And the bulldozers run on diesel. And 15 years ago, the OECD got cranky with Australia because we had never met our statutory obligation to have 30 days of refined transport fuel landed on the continent. Sorry, 90 days of refined transport fuel, 3 months at normal usage rates, at all times, to allow for supply side shocks. And 10 years ago, they huffed and puffed and got cranky again, and the government said, yeah, well, we'll do something. But 5 years ago, they got cranky again, and I huffed and puffed and wrote to the government, and nothing was done. And about a year and a half ago, when Barnaby Joyce had lost his job as leader of the Nationals, he'd lost his job as the Deputy Prime Minister, he'd lost his job as Agriculture Minister and Resources Minister and Water Minister and all that. To give him something to do, I wrote to him, even though I don't like the man, and we're on opposite sides of the political divide, me being a Greenie and him being a National Party candidate, Member of Parliament. I said, look, get onto the Minister for Energy and do something about this, because we've got famously 21 to 23 days worth of petrol, about 24 or 27 days worth of diesel, about the same amount of bunker oil to put in the boats that are supposed to carry our exports away, and strangely 101 days of kerosene. So the only thing that we actually meet our obligation for is jet fuel, presumably to allow the rich 1% to get out of Australia, was the thinking. But anyway, no regulation, no legislation requiring the oil companies to maintain any stockpile, strategic or otherwise, beyond whatever it's commercially convenient for them to hold. So that's all they hold. When I wrote to the Minister via my Member of Parliament, Josh Frydenberg was the Minister's name, and he said there are 47 boatloads of refined transport fuel permanently afloat upon the ocean, coming from places like the Gulf of, oh man, and Venezuela and Singapore, to come to Australia and bring us our fuel. And if we count all of those boats as well as the 23 days we've got on the continent, then we've got 45 days worth of refined transport fuel. So that tells us that we use 2 boats a day. That's how much fuel Australia uses. And I wasn't the only person who kicked up a fuss and boo-hooed and sobbed and moaned and wailed and whined and gnashed me teeth and tore at me hair. And eventually they said, oh, well, okay, we'll talk to the Americans. And the Americans gave them to understand that underneath Texas, in the salt mine where America keeps 1 year's supply of crude oil ready to be refined, their strategic petroleum reserve, they said what they would do for us is they would earmark the upper northwestern corner of their strategic petroleum reserve, and they would call it Australia's strategic petroleum reserve. And in times of a global supply shock, here in Oz, we can rely on Uncle Spam to keep us supplied with motion lotion. It's just that, as well as whatever's going on in America, we have to expect them to refine it for us and transport it to us. Because here in Oz, we don't have more than 1 or 2 residual refineries. We're not capable of refining as much fuel as we use. We have to buy it refined because the oil companies decided that it was cheaper for them to refine the stuff in Singapore at a mega refinery using economies of scale to make more money, and ship it to Australia, and the shipping was a minor part of the production price if they did it big enough and bulky enough. So the other part of the equation is Australia doesn't own any ocean-going oil tankers. The government decided back in about the 1970s that Australia did not need to have a nationally owned fleet of ocean-going anythings, because foreign-owned ships flying flags of convenience could supply us with manufactured shiny bright landfill much cheaper than we could pay Australians to operate the boats. So we don't have any boats that can carry refined transport fuel. We have to rely on the Dutch or the Americans or the Saudis, or somebody else who gives a shit what happens in Australia. Isn't that interesting? Because otherwise, oops, do we need to refocus over there? Places like Glen Innes become completely unviable. Like, you can't live in a little country town in New South Wales if you haven't got petrol and diesel. Because the days when everybody was self-sufficient in vegetables, and when we had enough topsoil and we had enough rain to grow enough fodder for the draft animals and the beasts of burden necessary to operate Glen Innes, with bullock drays and horses and carts, I'm sorry, but all that topsoil was dispatched to the bottom of the ocean. It's filling the riverbeds. It's not there. It's not available anymore. We can't use it. And as I was saying about the coal-fired power stations, the coal-fired power stations they back up the windmills and the solar panels, but we're still looking at 50 or 60% of our grid. Doesn't actually get its juice from windmills. It gets its juice from the coal-fired power stations. So these things, as decorative as they are, as high-techery as they are, they're not going to keep the grid running. And we don't have enough pumped storage hydro to let them push water uphill anytime the wind's blowing and run the water back down when you want to use the electricity. That's not a viable option. So we've got sort of a month and 10 days after the last boat leaves the refinery. That's how thin the veneer of civilization is. It may not be popular to think like that, but it's not wrong. The veneer of civilization in Australia is only 5 or 6 weeks. And now everybody in the world is being told to go inside and stay there for 5 or 6 weeks. And if you're over 70, well, you might have to stay inside for 3 months. And if you live in a country that's got really bad public health facilities, then we might well find that there's not much fuel coming out of the Gulf of Oman or Venezuela. I understand Venezuela's got a few political, social problems. I understand the Middle East is a fairly unstable sort of a place. I think Singapore's done a pretty good job at containing the virus. But how long that's going to remain the case, nobody knows. It's encouraging that only 14% of the people who are diagnosed with the virus require hospital treatment. But one of the most alarming things I've heard so far was a respiratory physician on background briefing on Radio National on Sunday state that so far he hasn't seen anybody be successfully weaned off the ventilator once they get put onto it. The most encouraging thing I've heard said is that although they were ventilating people with what they call intubation, it's where you stick a tube down somebody's throat and inflate a balloon around the tube and seal their windpipe to the tube and connect that to a machine. And then the machine sends pulses of compressed air into them, filtered compressed air, humidified compressed air, got a lot of oxygen in it, compressed air. And the idea is to use the air pressure to inflate the alveoli or air sacs in the lungs, because the lungs have become swollen by inflammatory response to the coronavirus. That's the sudden acute respiratory syndrome, is when you get a cytokine cascade and your own immune system is basically killing you by swelling everything up solid, and they're relying on air pressure to hold the air sacs open against the swelling in the tissue. Now, when you do it that way, there's no chance of air leaks and flecks of foam and spit and bubbles and aerosol coming out. So to safeguard the nurses and the doctors in the intensive care, they were going for this mechanical ventilation with intubation. But when they noticed that nobody was actually being weaned off the ventilator, they were just blocking a bed for 3 weeks and then dying anyway, they started using continuous positive airway pressure, CPAP, which are basically the machines used by people with sleep apnea. And that uses a mask, so you get some blow-by and you get some aerosolization, and it means that everybody in the ICU has to have really, really, really good barrier nursing technique, otherwise they're going to cop a blob of snot in the eye, or they're going to breathe it in or something. But the continuous positive airway pressure, if given to the patient much earlier than you would normally ventilate them, that holds their airways open from a much earlier stage. You don't wait until the air sacs have actually collapsed and the insides of them are stuck to each other by surface tension of the mucus. The CPAP holds the airways open, and those are the patients who are having the most success coming out of intensive care alive. So they've got a more effective treatment now than they had 3 weeks ago. But at the moment, with 20 dead in Australia and maybe 200 cases 3 weeks ago, I think it might have been only 180. I'm getting a functioning death rate, allowing 3 weeks from diagnosis to either recovery or expiration, terminal expiration. I'm getting about an 8% death rate of everybody who is diagnosed. And yeah, perhaps only half the people who are infected are getting diagnosed because only half the people have got symptoms. But the people who are symptom-free don't really matter for the purposes of this discussion. All they're going to do is think they're not sick and function as a source of infection, generating fomates, which are bits of live virus, which they put into their environment. So yeah, maybe the actual death rate, considering all the people who are undiagnosed, maybe that's only 4%, and that would put Australia in line with everywhere else which has not yet had its medical system swamped. In Italy, if you look at their caseload 3 weeks ago and their death toll to date, they're looking at about 30% of all the people who get diagnosed are dying. 30%. And once again, that drops to 15% if you invoke the people who are undiagnosed, asymptomatic cases, mild cases, the people who don't go to the doctor. Now, the curious thing is 14% of people who are diagnosed are going to need hospital treatment. You might as well say that if you can't nurse it at home and the health system's fallen to pieces, you're going to be pushing up daisies. which is why the governments are panicking. And the average age of people who do require hospitalisation is 54, and 62% of them are men. So once again, who knew that the coronavirus, or perhaps the Wuhan horseshoe bat, was paying such close attention to everything that was said by Greta Thunberg and everything that was said by the Extinction Rebellion. "24 days after the last boatload of diesel lands on the continent. No trucks, no groceries. No diesel, no coal-fired power stations, no grid. No grid, no electricity from the cash register to the electric pump in the fuel bowser. No electricity for the fuel bowser. You can't put petrol in the police car, or the fire truck, or the ambulance, or the SES rescue vehicle. The Army, the Navy and the Air Force in Australia is prohibited by law from storing their own fuel because it's really expensive to store fuel. Requires lots of paperwork, special insurance. The bean counters decided 30 or 40 years ago to just issue all government departments with a government credit card, and they could buy from the established commercial petroleum suppliers. Because after all, what matters is shareholders' profits and keeping taxes low. You wouldn't want to have any spare capacity, any resilience built into the system, would you? Oh no. That's not how the global vile age operates. And of course, my daughter is an essential service providing traffic control on this particular highway, but not here, north of here. And my son's the only auto electrician for 100 kilometres around. He actually keeps the trucks running. So we're not seeing very many Winnebagos. Grey nomads are conspicuous by their absence. Somehow it seems a sort of a pity that the veneer of civilization is so terribly thin and fragile. But that is how it is. And the people who set it up never ever considered having a fail-safe mode for all the bright, shiny, progressive things they wanted to do. sun was never going to set on the British Empire. Hey, was it? And when the Global Pandemic Unit told the Trump administration to beware of the next viral pandemic, Trump's administration fired the bloody lot of them for their negative vibes, man. They couldn't permit any negativity. It might perturb the livestock who are otherwise busy feeding and getting fat. Imagine that. I thought I saw a car over there. Moving on Yarraford Road. So the world hasn't stopped working yet. Just the airlines, tourism, sport, hospitality, entertainment, music, fashion, real estate auctions, and cruise ships. Nobody wants to go on one of them anymore. Not never again. Those days are over. Tourists are unwelcome. Travellers represent potential infection vectors, generators of fomates. The world is shutting down and becoming more insular. What that little horseshoe bat has figured out is a way to make humans afraid to trade. That's how it's going to bring down the global vile age. The Australian fruit bat, the Congolese fruit bat, with Marburg virus, Ebola, Hendra. And to get Hendra virus, you have to kiss a horse that's already got the Hendra virus after eating food that's been put under a tree where distressed bats have been trying to relocate to, because somebody's already cut down all the big old fruit trees in the forest because the real estate developers are opening up the land. Marburg and Ebola, you really got to start out with a bat eater coming in contact with a bat's bodily fluids. And then other people have got to come in contact with the bodily fluids of a diseased bat eater to get Marburg or Ebola. What all the epidemiologists and virologists on the planet have been afraid of for 100 years is something that would be deadlier than the, quote, Spanish flu, which started in Kansas in 1917 and showed up in Europe in 1918 and was kept secret by the British government, the French government, the American government, and the German government, because they didn't want to interfere with public morale and pro-war sentiment. But it only had a 1 or a 2% death rate among the people who were diagnosed, and only 50% of the population contracted Spanish flu. This seems likely to have infected 80% or more of the population by Christmas time. Perhaps half of those people are going to present with symptoms, so that's 40%. And then 8% of those are going to die if they get proper hospital treatment, and it may be 30% of them if they get no treatment at all. The horseshoe bat is going to make humans too afraid to trade, and that'll stop the global vile age in its tracks. This is already the largest reduction in anthropogenic global industrial fossil fuel carbon emissions since the Soviet Union disappeared up its own cloaca as a result of attempting to compete with the science fiction Star Wars program, which Ronald Reagan's wife's astrologer thought was a really cool sort of an idea, the sort of thing that America needed to have. And all I can think of is, oh, what a gentle start to the apocalypse. Apparently, in the excited status of Norte Armed Americano, the gun shops have been bought out of all their stock of death machines and ammunition. Gun sales were upticking in Victoria, so they've banned all further gun sales and ammunition sales for fear of an uptick in domestic violence, as all the people whose marriages weren't doing particularly well at the best of times, when they had jobs and didn't have to spend too much time together, all those people are now locked down. Ah, yes. Hope you're going to come back. A wedgetail would be a nice diversion. So yeah, the domestic violence units are seeing a bit of a boom. The telephone counselling services are seeing a bit of a boom. Apparently women's refuges are having a population explosion. And on the bright side, well, it's hard to self-isolate. Waylards, yellowtail black cockatoos. As I was saying, it's hard to self-isolate. Oops. When you're in the middle of a food riot. So perhaps having everybody hiding at home, worried about being sick, or getting sick, if nothing else, it'll clamp down on the tendency for people to riot when the shopping centres do eventually empty. How we're going to go at the end of winter, in assuming the rain stops and we get another hot spring and summer, I don't know. Pretty bit worried about how the Northern Hemisphere is going to go with this approaching summer of theirs, when for the first time for 50 years or so there's not going to be any condensation trails from airliners to reflect sunlight back into space. And their winter was 4 degrees Celsius above their baseline average. And those cockatoos were red-tail blacks, or glossy blacks, not yellow-tail blacks. So I discovered when I got in a position to look up the cloaca of one in the tree perched above me. But it went away before I could get the camera on it. At least in a focused condition. Because when you're focused on a kilometre away, you're no good looking up a bird's bum at 20 metres. So yeah, most of the traffic on the road is trucks. And getting on for 12:05. I do declare mission completed. Time to go back to the endangered species sanctuary. After having a quiet little pipe and watching the world go by with a Mark 1 eyeball instead of 10-power Bushnells. It really is an excellent little spot to sit and ponder the ways of the world, the manifold ways, the mysterious ways, the workings of the world. Always look better when you stand on a high spot and look down at it all. I find anyway. There we go. The view from the top of the northwest ridge of Hinkler Hill, the summit of which is, as I said, up that way. Pretty much downhill all the way now. All the way to the power line gate. With its insane double parallelogram fence post strainers. Courtesy of the British floaty who always wanted to be an Australian grazier. Spent 30 years telling everybody how he knew better than they did what needed to be done. And then, when a third of all of these parallelogram arse first double strainer post fences of his started to completely fall to pieces and go rotten like this one, that's when he sold up and pissed off. Thus proving that he was not actually a new settler. He floated in, he stuck around, he made a lot of noise, he fucked things up, and then he floated out again. If he was a new settler, he would have stayed here and we would have buried him when he eventually died. At least he had a history here, 30 odd years. Now he's off somewhere where nobody knows about his terrible lack of understanding of triangles. Hi ho, hi ho, it's back to the hut I go. After my successful incursion, infiltration, reconnaissance mission out there into the wild badlands, the farmerlands, the place where the harvest everythingists dwell. An interesting morning's activity, and all things being equal, might go and do it again in another week, eh? See what changes another 7 days brings. Always assuming I'm in fit condition to walk a kilometre to the top of the hill for the sake of admiring the view. Ah, YouTube. The things I do to entertain and inform you. If not me, then who? Who's better suited, situated, sighted, and equipped for the role of fool on the hill? Mad scientist, hillbilly hermit, tree-hugging greenie, celibate vegetarian forest poet even. A great full nation has paid me to sit up here on the hill and think about what matters for at least 30 years. It's 34 years since I retired. I feel that John Howard would suggest that I therefore have a mutual obligation to contribute to society And what I contribute is my perspectives and interpretation of the view from the Endangered Species Sanctuary. And being a 59-year-old man at a time when the average age of people requiring treatment is 54 and 62% of the people who require treatment are men, so I think an endangered species sanctuary probably not a bad place for me to be. Really, if I had to sit down and calculate it all out. And you know, as I said to a friend in Bilo the other week, look on the bright side. He said, what fucking bright side? I said, could you imagine how pissed off you'd be if you'd been prepping for 40 years? Nothing ever fucking happened. Wouldn't that give you the shits? He laughed. He really did laugh. You could see the point in that. And it's not so much schadenfreude. It's just, I was getting a bit sick of people looking down their nose at me and laughing at me for being such a, what they saw as a horrible bloody pessimist. Whereas I figure that, yeah, since I've been about 9 years old, it's been perfectly obvious that human civilization was, one way or another, going to tear down its own civilization. Who knew they were going to do it with bat eaters and airlines and tourism? But that's what's going on. Whoever would have thunk it? And for those of you who are sort of geographically curious, topographically wondering sort of, just remove the tail of the falcon. And what we have are the boundaries of Warbles Onalot Global Headquarters. We are here. I have just perambulated along to here, up to here, up to about there. The military crest of the northwest ridge of Hinkler Hill. And from there, we're able to watch that little bit of the highway there, which is a kilometre. Okay? Whereas what I had said earlier on is that under normal circumstances between here, 10.5 kilometres out of town, and in here to the boundaries of the town, I would normally encounter 50 cars, or 5 per kilometre. So we should have had, in normal times, 5 cars along there pretty much the whole time. And we did not. There were times when we had 2 minutes with no cars at all in a 100 kilometre an hour zone. So they're travelling 1.5 kilometres roughly per minute. So we were seeing segments of the highway 1, 2, 3, 4 kilometres long with no cars on them versus 5 per kilometre. So I'd say highway movement around here is down by 95%. We're only seeing 5% of normal highway movements on the New England Highway, north out of Glen Innes. And yes, my nurse's back is giving me the shits after that long walk. And my ultralight motor glider test pilot's ankle is hurting like a bastard as well. And this calf is really tight and sore because I did the whole walk yesterday afternoon and the sun angle was wrong and I babbled on for too long and I got a couple of angles in there which I didn't really like, so I canned that video and had to reshoot the whole thing again today. So I've done that twice for you, dear YouTuberosities. Before I do declare the sun be over the yarding of the arm. Mango, no. Ginger beer with lemon myrtle. Indeed. Why not? Had a shot of rum. rumination juice. That's why they call it rum, in it. And on the emptiness of the stomach, a midday drink of rum. Should be rather good fun. Warbles on a lot of YouTube. Thank you for coming for a walk and enjoying the little bit of combat. First time for 36 years or something. I don't know. 1977, last time I played combat. 43 years. Warbles on a lot of YouTube. Ciao. Yes. That will, indeed. Put a sparkle into the day. Cheers.